Blog Talk Radio.
I just said, are you a racist?
Oh, okay. I thought there was something before that because there was about 20 seconds of silence. Well, you know, as I've said before on Gus's program, I have, as a white person growing up in this culture, internalized certain elements of racist and white supremacist thinking, no question about it. I've talked about that, written about that. I distinguish that...
Excuse me, I just want yes or no.
Well, see, but that's not the way human psychology works. The way I've answered the question before, and I will answer it again, whether one likes the answer or not, is that I have internalized aspects of racist thinking, as I would suggest every white person in the system of white supremacy has done. Now, that is different, however, from saying that I believe in, support, and advocate the system of racism and white supremacy, which I actually reject and attempt to fight against. But I would be dishonest if I did not acknowledge that I, like every other white person, have internalized certain aspects of racist thinking. I've always said that, but I do not believe that is the same as saying, as I think some believe it is the same as saying, that I therefore support actively and advocate for the system of racism, which is a system that I find deplorable, actually.
The words that you're using, I do not understand.
Why is that?
And all I need is just a yes or no. Are you a racist? Yes or no?
See, but that's not how human psychology works. It is not a yes or no question.
What's humans, whatever you call it?
Psychology? Psychology is the way that the brain functions. It's the study of the brain. And
I don't want the brain functions or anything like that. All I want is just a yes or a no.
Right, but it's not a yes or no question. And so you're going to be frustrated if you ask me that question. I've answered the question in very basic English, and I'm quite certain that you do understand. But I know that we like to play games on the show sometimes. And so I'm going to suggest that this is a very simple answer. I said I have internalized aspects of racist thinking. Now, if you want to take that as a yes to your question, feel free to do it. But I've also said that I have also internalized anti-racist thoughts, anti-racist norms, anti-white supremacist thinking, because even though I was exposed to racist ideas, and those have affected me like they've affected everyone, I was also taught to be an anti-racist, and so I've internalized that as well. So the best way that I can answer your question is to say that I have both internalized racist ideas and anti-racist ideas. Whether that makes me a racist in your estimation, you know, that's for you to decide. I'm simply saying it's part of who I am. It is not all of who I am.
You're just saying just buckets and buckets of words.
Context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and Justice in for another program to share constructive information on what racism, white supremacy is, and how it works. Program number 2 for an Easter Sunday. We should have Mr. Tim Wise, admitted racist white supremacist, on the program for his 4th visit. Let's see if we have him.
Hello?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Good. Okay, I can hear you too.
Outstanding. Thank you for sharing a bit of your Sunday evening with us for the program. Looking forward to it. I want to get our date for the next program set up.
Okay.
Are you going to the White Privilege Conference or no?
I am not going to be there this year. Actually, no, there's some stuff going on at my kid's school that I cannot miss, so I have had to tell Eddie that I'm not going to be able to attend in Wisconsin, but I will be going next year once I find out where that's going to be. So
okay.
I'll be able to make it.
All right. Okie dokie. Let's see. I guess we can keep doing Sundays. This is the makeup program from March 22nd. So we're doing the April program. That's correct.
Yep.
Okay. How would Sunday, April 25th work?
That looks good to me.
Okay. Are we doing 6:30 Central again?
That works well for me. If it works for you, sure.
Okie dokie. We'll do Sunday, April 25th.
Excellent.
At 6:30 Central. Groovy. Okie dokie. Got that out of the way. I'm actually going to switch and start with Justice, see if she has some questions she would like to ask, and we can get started.
Sounds good.
Justice, if you're there, your mic is on. You can go right ahead with your question.
Hello.
Hello.
What is the best way to respond to non-white people when you disagree with their views on racism, white supremacy, given the fact that you reacted to Dr. Francis Cress Welsing's view by saying it was pseudo-scientific BS?
Okay. Two parts to that question. Let me first off start with the last part having to do with Dr. Welsing, because I want to be very clear about what I did and didn't say and what I was referring to. In my email to Gus, which goes back, I think, over a year, where I first made the criticism of one part of Dr. Welsing's particular theory, and it had to do with the part regarding human sexuality. It was not a critique of the whole theory. It was a critique of that one part, and I referred to it in that way in a private email. I have never publicly used that phrase to criticize Dr. Welsing or her theory until, of course, when Gus brought it up on the show, which originally had been a private email correspondence, and then we talked about it. I certainly wasn't going to deny having said it, so I said it then. But I've never publicly initiated that criticism of Dr. Welsing. That was a private email, and it was only in response to one part of her theory. Now, in retrospect, I will say this. I think that it is typically best, and I think it is generally best, if white people, when they are responding to a non-white person...
Then why did you say it?
Well, I said it because I believe what I said to be true. Having said that, what I'm trying to say now is that I think the way in which I expressed it, even though that is my opinion about that part of her theory, the way that I expressed it was not the way that I would prefer that I had expressed it. It is not the way that I like to address anyone when I respond or criticize their theories, least of all someone who is a person of color, because I realize that the sort of impression that gives, and it's understandable, when a white person speaks to a person of color in that way or speaks about a person of color in that way, is disrespectful. So even though I do believe that my criticism of that part of her theory is a fair and legitimate criticism, I don't think I said it in a way that I should have. And so, I think that all of us at some point use a tone and certain language and ways of speaking to others that we, in retrospect, we regret. And that's one of those tones that I took that I don't think I should have taken, because I don't think that's the best way to do it.
What are your reasons for saying pseudoscientific BS about Dr. Francis Cress Welsing just said what can't?
If I'm, I think.
Okay. This is my question. What are your reasons for saying pseudoscientific BS about Dr. Francis Cress Welsing?
Okay. I did not say that about her as a person. I did not even say it about her entire theory. I was specifically addressing one portion of the theory having to do with human sexuality and having to do with, in particular, same-sex attraction or homosexuality. And what I said was that it was pseudoscientific BS. The reason I said that is because scientists, biologists, and geneticists, which neither I nor Dr. Welsing are, but there are millions of them who have studied this particular phenomena, have identified it in over 120 different species of animals, including humans. Obviously, if something exists in hundreds of species, that is to say, same-sex attraction, in hundreds of species, to say, as she does, that it is something which has essentially been concocted and foisted upon non-white peoples by white peoples. In other words, her argument, as I read it, and I could be wrong, but as I read it, is that homosexuality is not a naturally occurring thing for the most part among non-white peoples, that it is a European or white thing that has been placed on non-white peoples as a way to attack or as a way to preserve white genetics and as a way to destroy non-white peoples. There is simply no scientific evidence for that, and all of the scientific evidence says that it is a naturally occurring phenomena in hundreds of species, including humans. So when scientists say that that is true, and when there is literally zero scientific evidence that I have ever seen published in any academic, scientific publication that says the opposite, then I think it's fair to call it pseudoscience. What I shouldn't have said is the BS part, because to me that was disrespectful, and that's not the way that I should have responded. It's not the language I should have used, although, again, I only did that in a private email. I would not have said it publicly, nor would it have been brought out publicly, for the fact that that was discussed by Gus on the show. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Then what other word would you use besides BS?
I think I should have just left my criticism with saying that that part of it was pseudoscientific, and there shouldn't have been any other word attached. I didn't have to include any other word, and I shouldn't have. So there was no need to get, sort of mean or personal, and I think that I got personal in a way that I didn't need to, I guess, is by adding that word. I could have just said that I thought it was pseudoscience or pseudoscientific and left it at that.
Okay, I'll be off for now.
Okay.
Context of white supremacy. Gus, Timothy, Justice. I want to point out that's 2 additional fares. We are not quite 13 minutes into the program, and Tim Wise has already said fair twice. I want to back up to make sure that I get my interrupts. When we were on the program last, actually, I didn't even call them interrupts. I said I would just like to interject. I believe when you were on the program last time, I had 2 interjections. You were on for an hour, so we have a 2-hour program. I'd like to request 5 interjects, just if I feel something's important that I would like to bring up immediately. So I have 5?
Sure.
Thank you. Screw me. All righty. I guess I would like to start off. You gave a presentation in California a few weeks back. I know you give a lot of lectures, so I'm going to try and be as specific as possible.
Right.
Was it Chapman College in California?
I was at Chapman, yes, in
okay.
Orange County, right.
Okay. Someone who is not a listener, but they are concerned with racism, white supremacy, Malia Cunningham. I want to make sure, I haven't met this person, so I want to make sure I'm not botching the name, Malia or Malaya. I think it's Malia Cunningham. Talk about 6 degrees of separation. This was 1 degree. She saw you at Chapman College. I believe she even said that she played a role in her student organization in getting you to come and speak to them about racism. And she spoke with someone who is a listener of the cows, and she said, see, I just heard Tim Wise speak. In fact, we had dinner together, and it was great. I thought you would really appreciate that because I know you're, really into racism, white supremacy, so I wanted to share that. And the individual responded, and he said, well, Tim Wise is a racist. And Malia Cunningham, she said, well, wait a minute. What are you talking about? He just came down here and he talked to us about racism, white supremacy. I feel like I learned a lot. I was really inspired. What do you mean he's a racist? And he went on to explain. He sent her some programs, and he tried to just walk her through the process. Yes, he is a racist. Shouldn't really be that surprising. He is a white person. What is the problem? And she just said, I'm super confused. I don't understand. I need some clarity. Hopefully she's listening. I sent her the link. She said it was acceptable for me to say her name on the program.
Okay.
I brought that up because this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly why I am extraordinarily suspicious of your work. This is exactly why I do not think that these are unfortunate mishaps that occur when you give your lectures or what have you, that this is the intended result, that non-white people are not suspicious of Tim Wise. They think Tim Wise is Jesus. He is the greatest white man to ever walk the earth and talk about racism. He for sure is anything but racist. And this continues to happen. In fact, this is the case every time I come in contact with a non-white person who has heard you speak. It is inconceivable to think Tim Wise is a racist.
Right.
I'm just curious to get your response. So.
Sure. Well, first off, Malia is a very thoughtful individual. My guess is that the confusion, as you call it, and I think that's a decent word for it in this case, but that confusion is probably the result of folks working off different definitions or understandings of what it means to say Tim Wise is a racist. So you and I have had that conversation, 4 or 5 times now, and we both, I think, know what I'm saying, what I mean. In fact, last time I think we cleared it up really well, that I'm saying, as I've said to you, as I've said to Justice, that naturally I've internalized racist thoughts, behaviors, and norms being white in a white supremacist culture. Now, I think if Malia were to hear me say that, and I say that, I mean, that's not even a remotely controversial thing that I say in virtually every presentation, I think she would know, oh, okay, sure. I think she would agree with that. I think that the thing is, when a person hears, and I'm just guessing, obviously she can speak for herself on that, and if she is listening, she could call and sort of clarify, I suppose, but I'm guessing that when she hears somebody say, well, Tim Wise is a racist, the thing that maybe is going off in her head, because I bet it goes off in a lot of people's head, is that you're saying that I am agreeing that I am a racist in the traditional sense that most people think of that term, which is an overt bigot, somebody who wants to hurt people, et cetera. And what I'm assuming she's saying is, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense to me. So sometimes we're working off different definitions, and I think that's what creates the confusion. I don't think she would at all be surprised by me acknowledging that, yeah, I've internalized this stuff, because I say that in every speech, including the speech at Chapman. There's a whole section in the talk where I talk about that. So I just think we're probably working off different assumptions, and that sometimes leads to the confusion.
Okay. When I say racist, and I'm very clear, when I tell people racist, I give them my definition. Except when we have repeat guests on the program, every program, no exception, white person or non-white person, starts with definition for racism, white supremacy. I don't think that's something I conceal or hide from anyone that I speak with. When I say racist, I don't mean, well, Tim Wise is white and he grew up in a system of white supremacy, so, he's just been conditioned to have certain racist ways of thinking. That's all of us, white people and non-white people. That is not what I am saying at all. What I'm saying is Tim Wise directly, indirectly, consciously and or unconsciously mistreats people because they are not white. And we had agreement on that definition last program. That's what people should understand. And if I could get a yes-no question or yes-no answer, do you think it would be constructive if non-white people thought of you as someone, if they suspected, I want to make sure I'm real clear, so do you think it would be constructive if every non-white person, every victim of white supremacy suspected that you do consciously support and work to maintain the system of white supremacy?
Well, I'm not sure, and I'll tell you why. I think it is constructive, and we've talked about it this way before, for people to suspect that I am racist/white supremacist for all the reasons that we've talked about many, many times. To say that I would say it's constructive for someone to think that I consciously seek to injure people or maintain the system of white supremacy, deliberately so, I'm not sure if that's constructive or not. Maybe it's helpful. The reason I say that I'm not sure is, and I'm not trying to be cute. I'm just saying that there comes a point where if the assumption is this is a bad person who tries to hurt people, then I'm not really sure that we can ever have conversations about this subject or move forward in any constructive way. And I think that maybe that level.
Okay, I'm going to use one of my interjections. I have 4 left. I'm going to write that down so I don't interrupt you more than I should be. So I have 4 left. Okay. Yeah, that's why I asked for a yes or no question, number 1. Right. Number 2, we've seen the conversations that you have with non-white people where you do not effectively convey, hey, I am a racist, and give the exact definition that we agreed on last week, or if you can come up with a better definition so that they understand directly, indirectly, consciously, and or unconsciously, I mistreat people because they are not white. Non-white people, if they don't remember anything else that you say when they hear you give your lectures, that's one thing they should make sure they remember. Oh, yes, Tim Wise, racist. Got it. Okay. The fact that you consistently go speak to non-white people, and the result, you said it on your last program, whatever your amendment to your presentation that you had began using, whatever that is, it's still not being effective when you speak to non-white people. They still don't think, I should be suspicious of Tim Wise. I believe you said that before on the program. It would be constructive if non-white people were suspicious of all white people. Is that true? Have you said that before?
Right. And what I said the last program, unfortunately, it was right at the end, and we had to go. But I think it is worth repeating. After we had, I think on the third program that I appeared, had that conversation, and we discussed the way that I could work that very deliberately into my talks, I said, okay, I'm gonna give that a shot. So I go out there and I do that, and I've done that several times repeatedly, and been really overtly, spent a significant number of minutes on it. And what has happened in those occasions when I've been really explicit, as opposed to just sort of subtly throwing it out there, has been that people have come up afterward, and the effect appears to be, from the conversations that I have then had with non-white folks afterward, that the mere fact that I'm putting it out there so blatantly and owning that and naming it and admitting it and acknowledging it in myself is actually having the effect of purchasing, in effect, for me, more credibility. In other words, folks are saying, wow, well, now that you say that, I know you're for real. So it's almost like a no-win situation. If I don't mention it, you're right, people might not be suspicious enough. When I do mention it, it almost makes them less suspicious. And I honestly don't know what the proper way to address that is. I mean, I can reiterate, I can say, well, now hold on a minute, and I did. But that doesn't seem to, it's not as if someone's going to go, oh, okay, now, I don't know. I'm not sure. I cannot control, obviously, the response that other people have to my work. So then I guess what we get down to at the end of the day is the question that maybe is at the root of all of this, and maybe it's a question that's at the root of whatever disagreement that we have at the end of the day, too, which is it ever helpful for white folks to attempt to challenge racism and white supremacy, or to attempt to be allies in that struggle? And maybe that's a conversation to have, because I'm wondering, when it gets down to it, if nothing makes a person suspicious, and if you tell people be suspicious and that just makes them less suspicious, right, I'm not sure what we're left with.
Are you open to, if you are unable to speak to non-white people in such a manner that they are suspicious of every white person, no exceptions, including Tim Wise, if you are unable to do that in an effective manner when you speak to non-white people, are you open to discontinuing giving talks or presentations to non-white people?
Well, keep in mind, most of my talks are not really to non-white people. I mean, most of my talks, the audiences are 90% white, 85%.
Come on, Jim. I mean, I
true.
feel like you're not being truthful with me now. I know
I'm being 100% truthful. I can send you a list of all these colleges I go to. I mean, Chapman is actually a very good example. That is an extraordinarily white school. Are there non-white people there? Absolutely. There are very few places I go where there are no non-white people. But the overwhelming majority of the institutions where I speak, the conferences, the schools, the community organizations are overwhelmingly white. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. I mean, most of the people... Yeah,
hang on, because I want to get to this. Whether it's one, whether it's 5,000, the question was, if you are not able to effectively speak to non-white people so that they understand I should be suspicious of every white person, no exceptions, including Tim Wise, are you willing to discontinue speaking to non-white people, whether it's 1 or 5,000?
Well, no, and I'll tell you why if you'd like to know. As I've said before, I don't do this work on behalf of or as charity for non-white people. I fight racism and white supremacy, whether one thinks I should or not. I fight it because I think if it isn't fought and if it isn't dismantled, it threatens all life on the planet. And I don't have to have permission to do that work because that's my children, that's my family, that's me, that's everyone. So in that regard, I think for me or any other white person to say, well, I'm not going to do it if there are folks who were still confused by what I'm doing, would be to say, oh, well, I guess that the fate of the planet isn't sufficient for me to do this if there's any potential risk. And I don't really think I have that. I don't think I can make that call. I think that the role of white allyship has to always be suspected, and it has to always be carefully done. But the idea that white folks should not do the work at all unless they're going to be sufficiently suspected is to say that literally millions of people who could become allies should just roll with the system and overtly keep it in place and not even try to challenge it. I'm not sure how that helps change the system of white supremacy. It seems to me it would only embed it further. So, I could stop and go about my business, and every other white person in history who's tried to be ally could have done that. I think if we have an honest historical discussion, we would have to conclude that that wouldn't have moved the ball 1 inch further toward ending white supremacy. I could be wrong, but I just don't see how that would help.
I hope everyone listened very closely to that answer. Highlight, that might be a sound clip. Very important. I hope everyone go back and listen to the answer that he just gave to that question about whether or not Timothy would be willing to discontinue speaking to non-white people if he cannot effectively convey that they should be suspicious of every white person. I did not say that you had to completely stop making any effort to work against racism, white supremacy. There certainly are boatloads of white people that you could be talking to, giving lectures to, writing books for, still doing your work, just not talking to non-white people.
But how do I ask the school to say don't let non-white people come? I mean, how does that work? I mean, they're not going to do that.
Are a white person in the system of white supremacy. I'm real certain you could use your words effectively to say, hey, I would love to talk to non-white people. I would love to be an ally to people of color. I would love for us to work together to combat this problem. However, it has been my observation that because of the conditioning of racism, white supremacy, the tendency is for non-white people, they hear me or they hear other white people speak about racism, white supremacy, and it lowers their guard. I have tried, I have racked my brains to figure out a way to speak to non-white people so this doesn't happen. I have failed as a result to make sure that I am not inadvertently causing non-white people to be less suspicious of white people. I'm not going to speak to them about racism, white supremacy. I'm just going to focus my efforts on talking to white people. I'm real certain you could use your words to do that.
Can I tell you why that wouldn't work?
Let's hear it.
I mean, first of all, no school would legally be able to say, I mean, it's just the law. They could not say only white people can come to this event. And I speak 80% of my talks are at schools. They would not be allowed to do that. Even if I told them it's a great idea, even if I explained it to where they really got it. And first off, they'd probably look at me like I was speaking some foreign language. They wouldn't get that at all. But even if I explained it and could explain it perfectly, they would say, that might make sense. We can't do that. And therefore, I wouldn't get to speak to anyone, including the white folks, who I'm trying to encourage to be allies, which means functionally what you're suggesting would mean there is no such thing as white allyship, and there is literally, I can talk to my neighbors, but I wouldn't be able to talk to anyone in any kind of setting that would be an institutional setting, because it's just not legal to say non-white people can't come to this event. They just can't do it.
We're in a system of racism, white supremacy. White people demonstrate every day, at least in my neck of the woods. White people demonstrate every day. We do whatever we want to do, whether it's go to the moon, whether it's practice racism, things that are so-called illegal, things that are legal. White people demonstrate an extraordinary ability to get things done worldwide. I'm real certain White people could pull that off. And I'm sure they could do it so that it doesn't sound crazy, it doesn't sound racist. I'm sure they could do it in such a manner that it makes total sense if they were really interested in replacing white supremacy with justice. The second thing I would say in terms of this so-called white ally, if the result of having white allies is lowered suspicion of white people, then no, I'm not interested in white allies. And that has been the result that I've seen thus far, is that so-called white allies, invariably, the result is that the non-white person ends up thinking, well, there are lots of white allies. There are lots of white people who are not interested in practicing racism, white supremacy anymore. And in fact, some of those white people who, are still practicing racism, white supremacy, we can convert them. And I believe when you were on the program in June, you indicated nothing could be further from the truth. There is no evidence that white people are interested in discontinuing the practice of racism, white supremacy. And I'm just saying that the work that you do, Malia Cunningham, other non-white people that I know who talk to you, the result has not been constructive in terms of the way non-white people should be thinking to replace white supremacy with justice. It has not been constructive, your white allyship.
Okay, well, that's fine. I mean, I understand that that's your opinion on the matter, and I think that you may be selling Malia and a lot of other folks short in the sense.
What do you mean when you say selling them short?
I mean, I think that the folks that you say are confused to the point where apparently my words make it impossible for them to move forward in the struggle because they just sort of give it all up to me and think I'm Jesus and all this other silliness, which I'm sure they...
Wait a minute. Number one, that's a little demeaning to say it's other silliness. This is what these people say, sir.
They haven't
this is
said that, Jesus.
Wait a minute.
Wait
a minute. They have. I want to overemphasize this. This is not Gus coming on the show and trying to be cute, as you say, or engage in hyperbole. This is what these people have said. They have looked at me like I was crazy when I said this guy has admitted to being a racist on my program. That is beyond the realm of possibility for these people. They have raved about your work. Random people have stopped me with autograph, non-white people have stopped me with autographed copies of your book as though it was the Holy Grail. This is not exaggeration at all. This is a serious problem. And that's why I said I want people to listen to that answer very closely. The fact that you said, regardless of that, regardless of the impact that your work has on non-white people, even if it's not constructive, no, I'm not willing to stop talking to non-white people. That speaks volume to me. That speaks volume to me. In fact, I can move on to the next subject because that's really all I need to hear on that.
Go right ahead. That's fine.
Can I make a suggestion? Since we're experimenting with your presentation on what you tell non-white people to make them suspicious, can I give you a suggestion? Something that you say every time you go out and give a presentation that is directed specifically at non-white people to see if we can help correct this problem?
Sure.
Okay. And I would like this verbatim, no words changed. I would like if we can get agreement that the statement that I have crafted is accurate, makes sense.
Okay.
I don't want it changed in any way. Every time that you go out and speak and they're non-white people who potentially can hear what you have to say, say this. And it is, I am Tim Wise, and I am a racist, white supremacist, meaning I consciously and or unconsciously, directly and or indirectly mistreat individuals because they are not white. If you are a non-white person and you only remember one thing that I say, remember that I, Tim Wise, am a racist, white supremacist. As long as the system of racism, white supremacy exists, non-white people should suspect that the primary objective of any white person, including Tim Wise, is the maintenance of white domination worldwide. Is that statement something you would be willing to say every time you speak in front of a non-white person or persons?
Well, I'll tell you what. First, you're going to need to email it to me because I couldn't write it down as you were saying it. So I'm going to have to take a look at it after we're off the air and look at it and go through it sort of word by word and see. I like it generally, and I have no problem with the thrust of what it's saying. The only thing I would suggest is that I think this idea that the only way that a non-white person can understand is to use a specific mantra or crafted set of words is, in my estimation, not only isn't it logical, it's actually sort of insulting. And the idea that unless I say it that way, if I change one word, one comma, one order of the words, or add a word, or change a word, or add a whole phrase, that somehow that's when it becomes mystified. I'm not sure why we assume that that's the case, particularly when you've said multiple times that when you say that, when you say, I'm a racist white, talking about me, a racist white supremacist, I've admitted to it, and that's what it means, and they still look at you with this look of utter confusion, what that seems to say to me is that I can say it exactly like that, because that's how you say it, and folks are still going to have a blank stare like, wait, what? And then the problem with that...
Okay, that's, I've used 2, got 3
cool.
left. Got 3 left. Okay. Number 1, invariably when I speak to the non-white people, you have already got there first. In the system of racism, white supremacy, we've already acknowledged that's what white supremacy means. You have a lot more power than I do. Your words have a lot more power than I do, even if we say the exact same thing. The fact that it is Tim Wise and you are white, that amplifies what you have to say 10, 20, maybe even 100-fold over what I have to say, because I am a black male, and you know this. The second thing, I'm not saying you need to say it exactly this way. Don't move a comma, because non-white people are so dumb that they won't grasp it if it's said in a different manner. That's not why I'm saying it. I'm saying it because I strongly suspect that something would get altered, moved around, that would change the content of what I'm saying so that it's something else that would not convey what non-white people need to hear, and that's be suspicious, no exceptions, even Tim Wise, be suspicious of every white person on the planet as long as the system of white supremacy exists. That's why I don't want anything altered. It's much more of a reflection of my lack of trust in you as an admitted racist, as opposed to non-white people being confused, although that is a big part of it too. Non-white people are very confused about the system of white supremacy and the fact that it still exists. I would say that's Exhibit A as to our confusion.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the clarification because it does help me understand your purpose for coming up with the phrase. I'll tell you what, email that to me exactly as you said it, and I will hit you back with an email that will express my thoughts about it. And if I believe after I look at it that there are parts of it that I would want to say in a slightly different fashion, I'll let you know what those are. You can tell me what's wrong with that if that doesn't convey the same context, because I might want to add some things. I wouldn't necessarily subtract from what you've said, but I might want to add some things to it. I don't think those things would change the context, but you might disagree. We can have a conversation about that after the case.
Okay. It has been emailed to you. Check your box. And, yes, I would love to have a discussion about this to get something crafted specifically that you can say to non-white people. Justice, if you have some questions, please go right ahead. Oh, I think she's still with us.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, we got it. I can hear you.
Okay. I heard you say fair at least 2 times on today's show. Last show, you apologized for saying the word fair. I suspect if you were truly sorry about saying the word fair, then you would stop saying it. Will you tell me exactly what you do to practice racism and white supremacy?
I'm trying to. Is there a question in the part about fair, or was that just a statement, and then the question was the last part?
About the fair, that was the statement. That was
okay.
Totally different.
Okay.
Different.
So if you could repeat the question part again, I'm sorry.
Will you tell me exactly what you do to practice racism and white supremacy?
Okay, sure. I think, and I don't know if I've talked about this on the other shows or not, I might have. The examples of what I think I have done over the years to practice racism and white supremacy, or to engage in it, or to do it, have been a couple of things in particular. Number one, the way when I started out doing activist work or anti-racism work, and I'm talking now, going back 20 years, I know I mentioned this last program, engaged in the kind of choices that I made, the kind of actions that I was involved in, the kinds of decisions that I made about what kind of activism to do, if I was going to do a protest or if I was going to be involved in some type of activity. A lot of the choices that I made as one of the leaders of that group, and this was back when I was in college doing anti-racism work, were decisions that marginalized, obviously in a negative way, non-white peoples, in the sense that I didn't really check in with them. It wasn't like we had a consultation where we all sat down and planned out the strategies. I just went sort of full steam ahead, picked strategies without really thinking about and considering the effect of some of those strategies, or the possible effect on non-white peoples. And that was something which I think was a way in which I acted, in effect, in a racist way or a white supremacist way, because the non-white people really could have been hurt by that. Now, luckily, there weren't really major negative consequences that came from it, but it could have. So that was one example. A second example, I would say, in terms of the ways that I practice or engage in white supremacy and racism, is that, if I write an article, if I go and give a speech, almost by definition, although I'm speaking against racism and white supremacy, or I'm writing against it, nonetheless, when I'm doing that, just because I get attention, just because I get credibility, as Gus said a second ago, that non-white people can't get, there's an extent to which even my anti-racism work, like any white person who does it, even that is, to a degree, a form of racism and white supremacy, because I have privilege and I get more credibility for saying the same thing than Gus would get for saying the same thing. See, he and I might say the exact same thing, and as he just said, I will be given more credibility. Now, in a way, that is a form of racism and white supremacy. I would still say that it's important for me to speak out, but nonetheless, when I do speak out, if I get more credibility, that is still indirectly a form of racism. And so that's something that, virtually every day, I guess, I'm involved in, because I'm always writing or speaking about the subject. So I have to remind people of that. When I give speeches, I'm always really wanting to point out to them that I know that they're hearing it differently from me than they are from a non-white person, and the only way that racism can really be eradicated is if they will listen to the very same point made by a non-white person than when I'm making it. That's an important thing for them to be able to do, and it doesn't take away.
Who's they?
Whoever the audience is. If I'm speaking to an audience of people, I want to make sure the white folks in particular who give me more credibility, and the non-white folks, but especially the white folks who are the bulk of my audience, hear that, and that they know that they are responding differently to me than they would to a non-white person saying the very same thing. Now, the fact that I say that, that doesn't change the fact that I'm still engaging in racism, but I'm trying to do that as a way to sort of not balance it out, I guess, because it can't totally balance it, but as a way to make sure.
I don't understand that.
I'm sorry. What I'm saying is, if I'm giving a speech and it's about racism, and it's a speech against racism, right? The fact is, like Gus said a second ago, he could give the same speech or one very similar with a lot of the same points, and it wouldn't be taken as seriously because of the way racism and white supremacy work. So whenever I get up to give a speech, even if it's against racism, you could make the argument, and I would, that there's an extent to which, I'm engaging in racism by giving the talk because I'm getting more credibility. The only way that I can try to make that right, if you will, or make that less.
All I need is just who's they, like white people, the audience.
Whoever's in the audience. Definitely whoever's in the audience. Whoever's in the audience.
Okay, that's all I need.
Okay, cool.
Do you have some more questions, Justice?
Oh, no, I was just waiting for Timothy Wise to go finish up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was that. Those were my two examples. The ways that the way that I've done activist work and the way that I do my regular work has an effect, I think, on one hand that is racist. Hopefully it has a different effect on the other hand, but that's for others, I guess, to determine. But those are the ways. I can't think of any other way that I practice or engage in white supremacy in any direct way. I suppose the only other example would be to say, whenever, if you're in a system of white supremacy, for example, and you own a home, which I own a home, or if you I don't know, the fact that I can drive around the neighborhood and I know that I'm not going to be followed around because I'm white and the cops suspect me. Every time I drive out of the house, I guess in a way, I'm engaging in racism and white supremacy because I'm receiving privilege. It might be indirect, it's not something I'm going out and grabbing, but it's coming to me anyway. So I guess that's participating. But those are not so much action things. I was thinking of the action, and that's why I mentioned the speaking and the writing and the activism in the past. Those were the active ways that I have engaged in racism and white supremacy. The others are a little bit more passive or indirect,
Gus, you there?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Did you have any other questions, or?
No, I didn't have any questions. I just wanted us to ask who's they, and that's it. And that's it.
I gotcha. Okie dokie. I guess number one, I wanted to make sure I didn't forget. I don't have private discussions with white people about racism, white supremacy, with regards to the emails that Timothy mailed me in May of 2009. Anything that a white person says to me, really about anything, but certainly about racism, white supremacy, that's public. I plan on sharing it if I think it's important, if I think it's constructive. I plan on sharing it with as many non-white people as possible. So I guess I'm letting any white person know. Don't send me any emails. Don't say anything to me unless you are comfortable with it being repeated to everybody in the world. If you are not, I would advise you not to say it to me. And I would encourage other non-white people to take the same stance. Don't have private conversations with white people about racism, white supremacy. I'm not keeping secrets for non-white people. I think it is, I'm not keeping secrets for white people, racists, white supremacists. I think it is incredibly important to share that Timothy referenced a portion of Dr. Welsing's theory as pseudoscientific bullshit. I probably should have shared it sooner. I wanted to address the term fair because as both Justice and myself have pointed out, you've already said it twice this program. I think I have been prompting you about the use of the term fair to connote accuracy, legitimacy, justice, that this is racism, white supremacy, because it is making a connection between being white and being correct, being just, being legitimate. Everyone, I hope, understands why that is incorrect and why that should stop. I just want to point out the trend of your continued use of this term. I suspect you do it in many other settings, but you continue to use it on this program after being prompted. And I just want to give listeners a montage of this. And I also want to point out, Timothy has never contested when I have pointed out that he should not be using the term fair in this manner. It has been uncontested. So we've already had two today. This is a brief montage of fair on the context of white supremacy.
Well, I would agree with part of what you just said and think that it is a legitimate criticism of the way that I handled the interaction, in that I should have asked that question. You are 100% correct. I should have done it. And that was my flaw and my fault in not doing so, because you're right. Had I done that, we probably could have had far better clarity. There wouldn't have been any confusion, and I will completely take responsibility for that. That's fine. I would disagree that it was a conscious or deliberate act of racism. I was not trying to injure anyone by interacting the way that I did. I was not trying to injure justice, did not certainly mean to do that, and if I in any way did that, I apologize for that. But you're right that I should have asked the question, and that is a thing that I think I didn't do, and I should have done it probably three episodes ago. We could have had a lot less confusion on my part, perhaps less confusion on everyone's part, had I done so. So, you're absolutely right about that part. I think that that's a fair and legitimate criticism.
Fair.
What do you like about being white?
Well, that's a great question, actually. What I like about being white, obviously, is the ability to take for granted that I will have opportunity. I think anyone who has opportunity likes that. At the same time, as I've said before, it bothers me deeply that I live in a society that gives me better opportunity, because I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's right.
I just wanted to ask if there's anything incorrect about referencing any non-white person in the system of white supremacy as a victim of racism, white supremacy.
Oh, no, I think that's a fair term, and I don't think I object.
Fair, said it again.
Sorry about that. I think it's an accurate term. I think it is a legitimate claim. The ultimate real justice, social justice and racial justice, requires the eradication of white supremacy in all institutional settings. However, until that day comes, I think it is also important for non-white people to fight for just and fair treatment in the schools, on the job, so that they're not being discriminated against on the job. Even if the system is still in place, everyday black and brown folks should still be able to fight for fair treatment.
Context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, Justice, and Tim Wise, admitted racist white supremacists. Mr. Wise, if you could, I would like you to make sure that you're pointing out why this is important, why that is racist to connect whiteness with accuracy, legitimacy, justice, connecting whiteness with any of these terms. Explicit, way racist act, way white supremacist act, and we should all be calling that out consistently to make sure that we erode the practice of using any term that can convey whiteness or is associated with being white or whiteness, connecting that with justice, legitimacy, accuracy.
Sure. No, I think it's a good point, and I think that it's perfectly valid and important, not just valid, but important for you to have called it out, for me to call it out, and so I agree with you. And I have, over the years, tried very hard. Obviously, one doesn't always succeed, but tried very hard to make sure that the language that I use, the phraseology, the terms that I use, don't reinforce racism and white supremacy. And the problem is, and this is how deep it runs, right, when we are not only exposed to it, but we are literally, all of us, white folks, non-white folks, have this terminology drummed into us. Not just that word, but also just the whole connotations of white and black with what historically those have been used to connote. We end up ingesting that, and that becomes part of us, and then we play that back in our heads, and we say it without even thinking about it. So when I've used the term, I think it's perfectly valid to call it out, and I'm going to continue to try not to use the term. But the reality is we make mistakes, we say things, and we slip going back to the conditioning. That is how this system, I think, operates at an insidious and personal level. And so it does it on me, it does it on other folks. All I can say is, when I'm using that term, I'm not thinking about it, and that's not an excuse. In fact, that might make it worse. But that's something I think we do, and I do, because that's something, the kind of linguistics of white supremacy, right? The language, the symbolism of white supremacy is so deeply ingrained. So the word fair is one example, but there are lots of them. And I think it's perfectly valid to call that out and to strive not to do that.
Yeah, and want to make sure I point out, Timothy is not just someone who rambles about white supremacy without thinking. He at times makes $4,000 to speak about racism, white supremacy. So this is someone who is paid to be effective, precise, and powerful with the words that he uses. There could have been more clips. You said fair a lot on this program. I just couldn't go through and pick out all the times it's been said. That was just from the last program, all 5 of those. That was just from the February program with Mr. Wise. He used the term when he was on the program in January, and it's been used twice today. And I have prompted you about this repeatedly. That, to me, is also very significant. The fact that you continue to, and I suspect you use it in other places as well. I just want to point this out because this has come up on the program about non-white people being very confused about racism, white supremacy. There is a listener. Her handle is Sister on a Mission. I suspect this could be a non-white person. She first started off, she was, I guess, upset because she wanted to call in and all of the lines are full. She continued, and she wanted to make sure that she announced that she is black and she loves Tim Wise. That was one. Next, she said she is going to tell you to stop doing this show, that I am a joke. Let's see if she had some other comments that she wanted to share. She did have other comments, but I felt those were 2 of the most important ones. The fact that she wanted to state that she's black and that she loves Tim Wise, and second, that she wanted to tell you to stop doing the show, I am a joke, which is pretty close to what you said before. You said that we like to play games on this program. I want to reiterate, I am not about playing games. I'm not even feeling well today, and this is program number 2. I'm very serious about replacing white supremacy with justice, and this is exactly what I said. I find it very indicative of the system of white supremacy and the power that you have as a white person, Timothy, an admitted racist, the power that this system has, that there are people who apparently are victims who love the work that you do. And I'm saying, I strongly suspect you've come on this very program and practiced racism with the way that you talk to justice, being ambiguous and confusing, I suspect purposely, about whether or not you are a racist, your continued use of the term fair, and saying that you would not be willing to discontinue speaking to non-white people, even if the result was them not being suspicious of white people. And I'm sure there are others. Those are just the ones that I picked out right now. The fact that you come on this program and I suspect consciously practice racism, and or unconsciously, it's one of the two, right? And you still have black people that are out there ready to step to your aid and defend you against no good niggas like Gus. That is exactly what I'm talking about, and exactly why I feel you are most likely one of the most dangerous racist white supremacists in this area of the world, particularly with the work that you do. And I guess just to highlight, are there any other programs that you do where non-white people question you with suspicion? And if so, could you share those with us so we could check those out too?
Well, I mean, I've been on hundreds of programs, so I certainly can recall at least over the, last 5 or 6 years that I've been doing more media, a number of times when callers have called in. Now, some of these programs have been with white hosts. Some of these programs have been with hosts of color, where folks have called in and have challenged me and, in some cases, white allyship as a concept very, very vigorously. And on several occasions, we've had good conversations about that. And, of course, that happens at some talks as well, though I'm not going to deny that there are also people who don't do that sufficiently, and we've had that conversation, you and I as well. I guess, what it comes down to for me, and I could be wrong in this sense, and you could be right, but my sense of it is that, I'm a decent speaker. I'm a decent writer. There are a lot who are better, and I mean, I'm okay. I'm all right. But the point is, there are, I think, more than enough people of color or non-white folks who are fully capable of analyzing what I'm saying and deciding for themselves. Okay.
Got two left. I just stopped that one because it seems like, because you didn't share any programs specifically, it seems like there aren't any other programs where non-white people question.
Well, I just don't write down all the programs that I do, Gus. I'm sorry. I don't have the call letters. I don't have you're one of the few shows that I do repeatedly, so I know the name of it. If someone said, give me a program you do regularly, I could say yours. These other ones, I do hundreds of shows over many years, and I don't have the names of what these are. I'm
Okay.
Sorry
it
that
would
I don't
seem to,
but
it's no problem. You could be practicing racism and not revealing. Could be telling the truth.
Yeah.
I would suspect if you were getting other programs where non-white people were questioning you seriously, that might be memorable, particularly if individuals like, I believe it's Erica Connor, if they love you and the work that you do, and Malia Cunningham and other folks that think you're great, I would think that would stick out a little bit, that you've run into a non-white person who does not feel that way and has serious questions and suspicion for you. But,
Well, it happens
problem.
more than you think. That's why it doesn't stand out for me. That's the thing. And it doesn't stand out to the point where I'm going to remember the call letters at the station or who the host was. I'm not going to write all that down. I get on a program, they call me, I talk to them, and then we take questions, and then I'm done. Literally, there's no way that anybody can. I wish I were that organized. I'm not. So what can I tell you?
Okay, no problem. Justice, do you have some questions you would like to ask Timothy?
What is your definition of justice and racism, white supremacy?
Okay. My definition of justice, just the off the top of my head, my definition would be a system or a social system in which white supremacy and all forms of oppression, not just white supremacy, but certainly including that, are eradicated, and where people are no longer subjected to discriminatory treatment, unfair oppression, mistreatment, or any form of unjust treatment based on race, color, gender, sexuality, class, whatever. Any of those categories. And as long as any of those oppressions exist, I don't think we have a system that can be called justice. My definition of racism and white supremacy, which I think I might have given at some level in previous shows, but I define racism and white supremacy in two ways. They're related, but they're somewhat different. There's the ideology and there's the system. The ideology of white supremacy and racism is the ideology or the belief that white people are superior to non-white peoples around the globe in one way or another. And some people who have that ideology think of it as biological superiority. So in other words, they think white people are born superior. Other people have a slightly different version. They say, well, might not be born superior, but there's superior culture.
What's ideology?
Ideology is like a belief system, like the thoughts that you have. So the ideology of white supremacy would be the belief that white people are superior to non-white people. And so that's the one level, right? The second definition is the system level, right? And I define racism and white supremacy when we're talking about it as a system or a social order in which white people are dominant over non-white people. They have the top positions. They exercise disproportionate unfair power and disproportionate unfair advantage over non-white people. Basically, put simply, it's a system of white over non-white or white over people of color, a system where white people dominate and subordinate or discriminate against or marginalize non-white people. And so the ideology is certainly connected to the system, but the reason I use both of those is that I think you could have the ideology, like someone could believe in white supremacy and not necessarily be in a position to exercise it, but oftentimes they are. I'm just saying theoretically you could be like a poor white person who doesn't have a lot of power, but you still believe that you're superior. And by the same token, I would say you could have a system of white supremacy where the people in that system may not necessarily believe the ideology, but they go along with the system. They don't think to question the system. They may not consciously sit down and say, I think I'm better, because I'm white, and yet they're still part of the system. So the system can exist without the beliefs, and the beliefs can exist without the system. As it turns out, they both exist in this society. And so I use both of those so we can understand that any time you have an ism, any word that ends with those letters, ISM, you're talking about a system and a belief or an ideology. It's both of those things.
How do white people use non-white people for tools in all areas of people activity, including economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war?
Let me ask for a little bit of clarification. When you say use as tools, what do you mean? So I make sure I know your question and that I understand it.
So you want my definition of tools?
Yeah, that would be great.
Their benefit.
Okay, so how do white people use non-white people for the benefit of white people?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me think. There are, I'd have to give more thought than we probably have on the show to each of the categories, but let me give you a few examples. I think that white folks, for example, historically, have used non-white folks. One of the areas you mentioned was entertainment, for example. So I think one of the examples that comes to mind for me is the way that historically white entertainers in the field of entertainment, whatever field we're talking about, have oftentimes used non-white folks' art, whether it's music, whether it's dance, whether it's any visual art, and have used it, repackaged it, sold it, made more money off of it, for example, than the non-white person who created it did. So you think about the way that rock and roll music was taken directly from blues music and how a lot of white artists got very, very wealthy, essentially taking songs that had been written by black artists who had never made very much money off of those songs. And then the white artist basically did the same song or released the song, made a ton of money from doing it. You could say in that instance, and I think it would be a legitimate claim, that is, in a sense, quote-unquote, using a non-white person or non-white people for the benefit of whites. Now, I've heard the other argument, which is, yes, that's true, but to some extent, the non-white peoples then become, in some cases, their songs, the original versions, are sometimes then made more popular, but even if that's true, my argument would be it's still using them. So that would be one way, just in that field of entertainment. In the field of economics, you mentioned that one, I think. Look, historically, white folks have used non-white folks to do some of the hardest work, right? The hardest labor done on the land that we call the United States, for example, has been done historically by people of color. So whether it's white folks using people of color to work in the South under the system of enslavement, whether it's white folks taking the land of Native North American people so as to, build a new nation on the ruins of the people they took over and the land they stole. I mean, that's using non-white people. So that's another example. You think about right now what's happened recently in Haiti with the earthquake, and then if we go back and we look at the history of Haiti, what we know is that when the Haitian Revolution took place in 1804, after that time, France and the United States imposed very harsh economic sanctions, punishment on Haiti. Basically, these white nations, upset that this black nation had gained independence, placed sanctions on them, required Haiti to borrow money from American banks and from French banks. And then, of course, when they borrowed that money to rebuild their country or to build it up, they then had to pay back those banks, and they had to pay back more than they borrowed. So you had white folks and white countries, quote unquote, using this non-white nation, not just individuals, but the whole nation, to build up the economic strength of the United States and of France. So those would be, I think, some of the blatant examples, using the labor, using the land, using the art of non-white peoples would be some of the more blatant ones that come to my mind when you ask me that question.
Do you think you can repeat what ism means? Because I want to write this down.
Sure. Anytime you have a word that ends with those three letters, ISM, ism, generally what you're talking about is both an ideology or a belief system on the one hand, and also a system, an institutional system on the other. So there are other examples that sort of help me make that point. If you think of terms like capitalism, socialism, communism, those are also isms, and every one of them is an ideology. It's a belief system. There are people who believe in the system of capitalism, and they would be called capitalist. But there's also a system called capitalism, and there's a system called communism, and then there are individuals who believe in that system, who have the ideology. They're called communist. But you could be a communist in the United States, for example. You could have that ideology. You couldn't do much with it because we're not a communist system. You could be a capitalist in North Korea, but you couldn't do much with that because that is a communist system, not a capitalist system. So I just think it's important to distinguish between the beliefs and the system. Sometimes they go together, sometimes they don't, but pretty much whenever you hear that ending, the ism ending, you're dealing with both of those things, both beliefs and structures, beliefs and a system.
Based on what you just said, what can non-white people do to help eliminate the system of racism and white supremacy?
Well, I think that for non-white folks, the most important thing, and I think I might have said this either last show or the show before, something like it, is it's very important for non-white folks to start off by trusting their own instincts about systemic injustice rather than what anyone else tells them, including and especially white folks. So, for instance, lots of times I have met non-white folks who talk about the way they've been treated in the workplace, in a school, in the justice system. And they will talk about their experiences, and they will say, that they believe that they have been the victim of racism. And yet they will also say, I've heard many non-white folks say this, that sometimes they wonder if they are exaggerating or if they are seeing things or if they are wrong. And this makes sense because, unfortunately, racism is intended, I think, to make folks think they're crazy. I mean, I think that racism is one of those systems that has this crazy-making effect on people. It affects the psychology and the physical health of people. So I always say, look, by no means should you question what you're saying is true. And I think it's important that it be reiterated and that non-white folks, because the instinct, at least in my experience from non-white folks, is that non-white folks know what's happening, but they're being encouraged to think that it isn't. And so to me, the most important thing for non-white people is to know that indeed they are not crazy. They are experiencing exactly what they think they are experiencing. It doesn't mean that they never make a mistake of judgment, but it does mean that it's important to trust your instinct and not to be sort of sidetracked from that by bosses or teachers or whoever who says, oh, no, it's not racism, really, it's not that. I think that it's dangerous for non-white people to not trust that instinct, because that's an instinct that's been developed over hundreds of years of knowing when racism is operating. The second thing is for non-white people to engage in solidarity with one another. And I think this sometimes is something that gets forgotten. Around the country, there are times when you'll see, different folks of color, so black folks and Latinos, or Latinos and Asians, or black folks and Native American folk, or Arab American folk, especially, in the last few years, sort of fighting with one another over really the pieces of a pie that they don't even really own. And what I mean by that, take Los Angeles, for example. The last few years, there's been a lot of conflict between black folk in L.A. and Latino folk in L.A., and it gets talked about in the press. It gets talked about, television, newspapers, about gang members, quote unquote, black folks and Latinos fighting, shooting one another. I think it's very important for non-white people to remember that they have far more in common in a system of white supremacy than they have beef with one another or disagreement or differences. So for black and Latino and Asian and Arab American and indigenous American Indian folk, whatever term we're using for any given group, to remember that they really do need to work together to fight white supremacy, because white supremacy operates on divide and conquer. So if you have black folks fighting with Latino folk, fighting with Asian folk, fighting with Arab American folk, what's going on? Well, the system of white supremacy really is made stronger by that, because everybody's fighting with each other and they're sort of not focusing on the bigger problem. Los Angeles is the way it is, and black and brown folk are at each other's throats because the system has treated both of them, both groups, so badly that they have collectively very little, and they fight over these crumbs instead of realizing that the bigger problem is that system. So one, trust your instincts. Two, solidarity within these different groups of color. I think those are maybe the two most important. And there are probably others that, if we had all night, I could come up with. But to me, those are the two biggest ones, because really, if you have non-white folks acting together, struggling together, and there have been moments where they've done that, but there's a lot of times when you have folks of color fighting each other, or you have even black folks who are fighting amongst themselves over, the extent to which their skin is dark or not dark. I lived in New Orleans for 10 years, and you'd see this. And, of course, the bigger issue is white supremacy. Why is it that some black folks think that if they're lighter, that they're superior? In New Orleans, historically, it was because so many of those folks thought they were closer to whiteness, and they had been led to believe that whiteness made them superior. So then they start looking down on darker-skinned black folks. But really, who wins? When light-skinned black folk and dark-skinned black folk fight, who wins? White folk win. The light-skinned black folks don't win. They might be a little better off than the dark-skinned black folks, but they don't win. The winning is still done by white folks. So that kind of solidarity, I think, is very important for non-white people in a system of white supremacy.
Okay, I'll be off for now.
Context of white supremacy. Gus T Renegade. Justice and Tim Wise, admitted racist white supremacist. Gentlemen, he is a consistent listener at the C.O.W.S. He actually emailed these questions for the previous program. I didn't get them in time, so I'm reading them this time. This is from Mr. Thomas. He's called in regularly. He has 4 questions for you, Timothy. His first question is, what is the most you have made in 1 year from anti-racism work, from speaking engagements? A range would be fine. What is the most you have made off of 1 speaking engagement? So I guess that's 2. So what's the most you've made in 1 year from what's the most you've made in 1 year from anti-racism work, from speaking engagements, and a range would be fine? That's the first question.
Right. I do not discuss annual income with anyone, not anyone, other than my accountant, and they don't even have one of those most years. I do my taxes on my own. I don't discuss it. I will tell you, and I've told you before, what I make on individual speeches, and then you can guess, assume, imply from that whatever one wants to do. But I'm not going to give annual income. I'm not even going to give a range. I just don't do it. I didn't do it when I made $10,000 a year, and I don't do it now. I make more than $10,000, let's put it that way, but I didn't do it when I was broke, and I'm not going to do it now. I will tell you that on a speech-by-speech basis, the range for speeches is anywhere from free, which is about 20% of all my talks in a given year. I don't charge for it all, which are usually local community events or things like that, and then up to as much as $6,000. So that is the range, and within that, there's about 20% that I don't charge for. There's about another 15 to 20% that are under $1,000. The rest are between $1,000 and $6,000. And usually, what that means is not just one speech. It usually means I'll go in, I'll do a speech, I'll also do a workshop, speak to a class. That might be 2 or 3 presentations for that amount. But that's the range. And then from that, 30% of that goes to an agency that actually deals with all the specifics. So I don't even walk with that, and I want to make clear. When I charge $6,000, I would be walking with approximately $4,200, right, or somewhere in that range. So the range is anywhere from really nothing to $4,200 in terms of what I'm bringing home for any speech that I give.
Okay. If I'm recalling correctly, when you were on the program in January, I believe the upper range you gave for a speech was $4,000, not $6,000.
Well, I was thinking in terms of the part I take home, which is $4,200, for anywhere between $4,000 and $4,200. It depends on whether travel is included, that kind of stuff. But for me to make $4,200, the charge is $6,000 because a third of that, roughly, goes to the agency that does all the contract work, does all the travel, handles all the details, that kind of thing. So that's why I gave you the 4,000 number before, is that's my portion that I receive from a presentation where the charge is $6,000, but I don't make $6,000 is my point.
Okay. I guess my comment would be for non-white people listening, we need information. I don't care what it is. Information is very important. I do not feel it is incorrect to ask about salary, particularly for a white person who is doing alleged anti-racist work. I know a lot of people have difficulties asking about salary or divulging that information. This is very important, especially with a white person, admitted racist, who's doing anti-racism work that he is compensated for. The second question Mr. Thomas emailed is, would you continue your quote-unquote anti-racism work if you could not receive compensation, monetary or otherwise?
Sure, I would. Now, obviously, just almost by definition, I wouldn't be able to do it for as much as I do it, because I would have to have some other job in order to support a family. But I would certainly do it, and I would make time to do it, not just find time, but make time to do it. I would not, however, be able to do it, full-time, 80 hours a week, year-round because there just aren't enough hours in the day, so I would have to cut back dramatically. I wouldn't be able to write as often. I wouldn't be able to speak as often. But would I do it if there were no monetary or I'm not sure what other kind of compensation, maybe psychological or just accolades or whatever? Sure, I absolutely would. But by definition, I wouldn't be able to do it as much. And I guess one of the reasons that I keep doing it, not just as a commitment, but as a way that I do in fact make a living, is because I think, and in this I could be wrong, but I firmly believe that doing it more is more helpful than doing it less, because there are an awful lot of people, especially white folks, who I know have never heard an anti-racist message from another white person, who are being exposed to things because of either speeches or writings that they wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to, and are beginning to think about these issues in ways that they weren't before. I think on balance that's positive. One is free to disagree with that and think that's crazy, but I think that doing it more is better than doing it less. But I would do it either way. I would absolutely do it either way.
Okay. Third question is, would you continue your anti-racism efforts if any and all resources and compensation had to be surrendered as a compensatory investment plan to a non-white person or persons to use at their discretion to improve their quality of life?
I would certainly continue to do it, yes, even if monies that I made had to be, forked over, surrendered. I would do it. Like I said, the last question. Now, I wouldn't be able to do it as much because I would have to have some other job in order to support my family. But what I did do, if there were compensation for it at the end of the day, even though I were not doing it for a living, let's say, I would certainly, if that were the requirement, if that were something that were required, I would do it. Do I think that would be particularly helpful? That's a different issue. But sure, yeah, absolutely. But again, the reality is, if I was not able to make a living and support my family with my writing and with the work that I do, I'd have to do something else. And so the amount that would be available for that purpose would be pretty small. But would I still do it? Sure.
Okay. This is the last question from Mr. Thomas. He says, I am a non-white male of meager means, and I have a proposition for you, if you will indulge. I feel this show is of constructive value and would like to see it continue. Gus needs a MacBook Pro with a carrying case to ensure the show moves forward. I'm willing to borrow money from my retirement plan and sacrifice what little I have to keep the show going. I propose, if I contribute $500 towards said MacBook Pro and carrying case, would you or anyone in your circle who has vast resources far superior to mine match 2 to 1 in order to get the MacBook Pro? We can have all funds placed in a trust account with an attorney, and the attorney will then ship the MacBook Pro to Gus, and I will provide the FedEx account to have it tracked, and it will send you a notification when it has left and arrived to ensure the funds are for the cause as mentioned. Can you commit by a yes or no? And if yes, a date and time when we can have funds deposited in the next 2 weeks.
I cannot commit yes or no to that, no. I think it's an interesting proposition, but I'm not going to commit to that over the phone. I don't make financial decisions alone about anything. And secondly, when I sit down and look at the money that I'm going to disburse for anti-racist purposes, and I give money to several different organizations run by people of color, grassroots groups run by folks of color for that purpose, and I'm doing that regularly right now, as a matter of fact. But it's a decision that you don't make on the spur of the moment. If I did it, I certainly wouldn't need all that verification that you're talking about. I trust that if the money, it's going to go for whatever you say it's going to go for. But I'm not going to commit to a personal disbursement of $1,000 or whatever that would be for the purpose of purchasing a computer for the show. I think the show is valuable. I think it's constructive. Am I going to commit to sending $1,000 for that purpose right now. No, I'm not.
Okay, there you go, Mr. Thomas, your question. Feel free to call in if you would like to address anything further. I'm going to double check with Justice before I check the phone line. Justice, did you have other questions you wanted to ask Timothy?
On the last show you were on, you said Italian. What do you mean by Italian?
I can't remember the context of that conversation. Do you recall what I was talking about when I mentioned Italians?
I don't remember, but Gus, do you remember? Like, you can play a clip if you do remember.
He said the term Italians.
Do you remember the context of what I was talking about when I said it, Gus?
It was the show in February. Is that correct, Justice, or January?
Yeah.
Or is it? What was the? Okay, February. Italians.
I can take a stab at it if you want. The only time that I can imagine, or the only reason that I would have referenced Italians in either a speech or a radio program or writing would be if I was talking about the way that certain groups from Europe became white over time who weren't always considered white. That may have been what I was talking about, because there were certain groups, Italian folks, people from Italy, especially if they were from southern Italy, Irish folks, and Jews from Eastern Europe, who initially were not thought of as white people by the elite, the leaders of the United States, for example, so that when they came to the United States, they weren't quite white yet, and they weren't thought of as white. In fact, the Irish, certainly were thought of, in fact, they had been called black back in Ireland by the English, not because their bodies were black per se, not because their skin was particularly dark, but because they were seen as an inferior group by the English, and black was already being used, even then, as a term to imply inferiority. Italians, same thing. Southern Italians, because they did have darker skin often than Northern Italians, were, and a large number of Italians in the U.S. are from southern Italy. So they're from Sicily. They're from the southern part of that country. They were not seen as white originally. Eastern European Jews, like my great-grandfather on my father's side, when he first came to the United States in the early 1900s, he was not yet seen as a white person. Now, over time, all these groups became white. All these groups were able to, if you will, sort of graduate into that term, and they came to be accepted as white people, but they weren't at first. And the only reason I can think that I might have been talking about that was just to make the point that what white has historically in this country has changed in ways that are intended to make the group bigger. So at first, it's just the English and the Scottish, and then it expands to meet Germans, and then it expands to meet the Dutch, and then it expands because whoever's at the top, who's in the white group, wants to make that group bigger so as to have more power. And so that's what they did. When these Europeans came, they didn't necessarily like them. They didn't necessarily see the Italians, the Irish, the Jews as their equals. But they wanted to make their team, called white people, bigger. And the way you do that is you sort of invite these folks into your club, so to speak. And we know that that worked. I mean, if there's this movie that came out a few years ago called The Gangs of New York, and what that movie talked about, one of the things it talked about, was the way that the Irish and the German immigrants in New York City at the time of the beginning of the Civil War, so now we're talking, 1861 or 1862, engaged in a huge riot because when Abraham Lincoln was president and they imposed a draft that said all men of a certain age had to join the Union Army, these German and Irish immigrants didn't want to go fight. And the reason they didn't want to go fight is that they perceived the war as a war to end the enslavement of black people, and they didn't want to help free black folks, they had decided they wanted to be on the white team, and they went into black neighborhoods in New York City and burned them to the ground, as a way to demonstrate that they wanted to be white. And be part of the quote unquote winning team, so to speak. So that might have been talking about the way the white team got bigger, so to speak, by bringing in Italians, by bringing in Jews, by bringing in Irish folks, Germans, that kind of thing.
So that is what you mean by Italian?
Italian's anyone from Italy, but I was just saying that would have been the reason I brought it up, would have been to say that Italians became white after being in the United States for a while.
Is that what you mean by Italian? Yes or no? Is that what you mean?
People from Italy, right? People from Italy, right? Yeah.
Okay, that'll be all for now.
Justice, Gus, and Timothy, context of white supremacy. A different non-white listener, she emailed me a question. She said, this program today, you said that white supremacy will eventually destroy the world. She wants to know what you were thinking about when you made that statement.
Sure. I think there are two reasons why white supremacy is a threat to life on the planet. One is that I believe white supremacy is at the root of the environmental and ecological crisis around the world. Everything from resource exploitation, oil dependence, global warming, all of that. And the reason I say that is, to me, it's this notion of entitlement, this idea that the white world has, the U.S. being one and maybe the leading country in that, but not the only one, this idea that we're entitled to the resources under the earth, no matter where they are to be found, no matter how difficult it is to get them out of the ground. The idea, for example, when the Gulf War started, and now I want to go back to that first Gulf War in 91, it was very revealing that you had white folks, white conservative spokespeople saying, look, our way of life is at stake. If we don't get this oil, we're not going to be able to drive. We're not going to have the energy. And to me, that is a mentality of entitlement. And it says we have a right to those resources, even if they are under the ground of non-white peoples in non-white nations. We have the right to go in and get them, and you don't have the right to stop us. And we have the right to dictate the price and the terms of that, even though we know from all the evidence that resource exploitation, our dependence on oil, our use of fossil fuels, all this stuff that has to be mined out of the earth has horrible consequences for air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, global warming, all of that. And it's as if we just don't care. I mean, the people who are affected most by climate change are people of color around the world. They are the first to die. They live in coastal areas disproportionately. They are more likely to suffer the consequence. And yet the white world just keeps on trucking. So to me, that's the first level at which our very planet is imperiled by white supremacy. The second is that I think white supremacy is at the root of militarism and war. And we know that militarism and war, taken to its extreme, can certainly, with the weapons that have been created in this world, mostly, of course, by white folks whose supposed superiority clearly has not stopped us from creating these immoral weapons, can destroy life on the planet, whether we're talking about nuclear weapons, whether we're talking about hydrogen weapons, whether we're talking about fuel, air explosives, chemical, biological weapons. I mean, these are things that the white world throws around the globe as a way to control other countries. We're doing it right now in the Middle East. We have done it in Central and South America. We have done it in all throughout Africa. We have done it throughout Asia. And historically, the bulk of the damage initially has, of course, been wrought on people of color. But what we need to understand is that war and that militarism, that ecological exploitation, all of it, the impact of that doesn't remain localized. It is global. I mean, you have the possibility right now of that kind of militarism and war engulfing the whole world and resulting in complete annihilation. So I think both the war link with white supremacy and the ecological destruction link are the two most apparent ways that white supremacy endangers, in the long run, endangers all life on the planet.
hope that answered her question. I know some other folks called in. Cree, counter-racist evolving engineer. If you're there and you had a question for Timothy, please go right ahead. Cree, are you with us? Okay. I know a lot of other folks called in. I'll check your line in 1 second. I'll get one more caller and check your line again. Let's see. Gentlemen at 310, if you had a question for Timothy, 310, please go right ahead. Your line is open.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right. Gus, thank you for being a soldier today and doing the show sick. And Tim, thank you for honoring your commitment to dialogue with those victims of racism. Tim Wise, I have a question for you related to the dialogue that you and Gus were having earlier today concerning a possible formation of a disclaimer that you could give maybe before, after, or during your speaking engagements. I think this question that I have for you could help push the dialogue. Tim, you are Jewish, correct?
Yes, I am.
And you have written against anti-Semitism, correct?
Yeah, not a lot, but a little, sure.
Well, I've read some of your articles. You definitely have written some articles against anti-Semitism. Right.
Right, a couple.
If someone identified themselves as an anti-Semitic person that practices anti-Semitism, but claimed to be working to end anti-Semitism and traveled around the country giving lectures to mostly non-Jewish audiences, do you think it would be potentially problematic if this person did not give a clear, strong disclaimer that they were an anti-Semitic person that practices anti-Semitism?
Not necessarily, because I would assume that in an anti-Semitic culture, which, by the way, I don't think this is an anti-Semitic culture the way it's a white supremacist racist culture. But if it were, let's say it were still the way it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago, a major, huge problem for Jews.
Well,
I would assume it.
Hold on. I think you're confusing the situation for us. Could you just answer the question? I didn't ask about anti-Semitism in America. So, no, you don't think that would be potentially problematic?
I would assume that person might be anti-Semitic. I mean, I don't know that it would be helpful for them to issue the disclaimer or not, because if I heard someone talking about who, let's say, are you assuming they're not Jewish, right?
Correct. I said correct. If we had someone who identified themselves as an anti-Semitic person that identified themselves as someone that practices anti-Semitism, but this person claimed to be working to end anti-Semitism, traveling around the country, giving lectures to mostly non-Jewish audiences, do you think it would be potentially problematic if this person did not give a clear, strong disclaimer that they were anti-Semitic? And that they practice anti-Semitic. I mean, anti-Semitism, that is. Don't you think that would be very constructive for those people in that audience?
It might be. It might not be. I can only speak for myself. For me, whether or not there was a strong disclaimer, if someone who is not Jewish, whether they've acknowledged being anti-Semitic or not, someone who's not Jewish, but they've been raised in a culture which, for the sake of argument, encourages anti-Semitism and breeds that kind of thing into us, I would probably start with the assumption that they had those biases. I would not, however, necessarily assume, therefore, that they weren't serious about fighting anti-Semitism. If they issued the disclaimer, I mean, it might be nice. It might be a very honest thing for them to say. As to whether or not it would purchase any more credibility with me or be helpful to me in evaluating the validity of their arguments, I honestly don't know. I don't think that for me it would make a huge difference. Maybe it would for other Jews. I don't know.
And as far as if this person were speaking to other Jews, if we had this anti-Semitic person who practices anti-Semitism speaking to Jewish people, often maybe young, impressionable Jewish people at college, and claiming that they were combating anti-Semitism. You don't think that it could be helpful or constructive for those Jewish peoples listening to this person who says they're an anti-Semite and says they practice anti-Semitism, for them to hear that yes, hey, I'm an anti-Semitic person practicing anti-Semitism? You don't think that you can't see how that could be very, very, very important for those people?
I can see how it could be. I can see how it could be. I can also see how it might not matter, because in my case, if I'm listening to someone who's, and by the way, not just who's non-Jewish, if I'm listening to someone who is Jewish talking about this issue, I don't necessarily assume, number one, that they know what they're talking about, and I don't assume that they don't have self-hatred, even if they're Jewish. I don't assume, look, I've met plenty, and we should also clarify, anti-Semitism, I think, is a really inaccurate term to describe hatred of or discrimination against Jews, because, as a matter of fact, Arabs, non-Jewish Arabs, are more directly Semitic peoples than most Jews. Those of us who are Jews from Europe, Semitic refers to a language group, and we use this term incorrectly. Semitic refers to a language group. Hebrew is a Semitic language, but my people, my direct family, hasn't spoken Hebrew for thousands of years. We were in Europe speaking Yiddish, speaking German, speaking Russian. So I actually don't like it when Jews use that term to describe hatred of Jews, because we then don't use that term to describe hatred of Arabs or hatred of Muslims, which we should, I think as well, because most Muslims are Semitic peoples. So I just don't like the term. If a non-Jew says, I'm here to fight anti-Semitism, I immediately assume in this culture that they have probably internalized certain anti-Semitic beliefs about Jews. I don't know that for sure, but I start with the assumption that it's pretty hard to get around. Although, like I said, I don't think that problem is as big as the problem of internalized racism and white supremacy in this culture. Now, I don't know if we were in a different place where maybe anti-Semitism was a more rampant problem, maybe the disclaimer would be more important. I honestly, unless I was in that situation, I don't know how I'd react. But I think that for me, the disclaimer, I mean, it wouldn't hurt, but would it be particularly helpful? I really don't know. I don't know. Maybe. It's the best I can do, because it's a situation I can't even envision.
Okie dokie. We had one of our younger listeners. He had a question for Timothy. If you're there and you have your question, go right ahead, sir.
Why do you just don't stop practicing white supremacy?
Why do I what? I'm not sure I'm following the question. I'm sorry. Could you repeat it, please?
Why do you just don't stop practicing white supremacy?
Oh, okay. Well, the thing is that as much as one tries to, as much as I try to stop engaging in white supremacist behavior, thoughts, etc., the sad truth is, as long as the system exists, it is impossible to completely get away from it. It is impossible to just sort of throw up your hands and say, I'm going to stop, because every day that I exist in a society like that, I'm going to get advantages, I'm going to get privileges, benefits from white supremacy. So I'm practicing it just by getting those benefits. And until the system changes and is eradicated, that's going to be true. I wish it were easy enough to just say, I'm going to stop, but that's not, unfortunately, that it doesn't work that way. I could say that, and I have tried to do that, but the truth is, just by being alive in a white supremacist society, I'm going to be participating in it.
Why do you just don't stop killing non-white people?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm following what you mean by killing of non-white people. I directly have never killed any non-white person or any person, obviously. But obviously, look, white supremacy kills non-white people, and I'm involved in it just like everyone in the culture is. But it's not so easy as to say, I'm just going to stop participating in it, because that's like saying, well, why don't you just stop participating in consuming products or food? I mean, the truth is those things are, I could say, well, I could go live in the woods and, harvest berries to eat and not ever go to the store and shop. And I guess if I did that, I would not be participating in materialism or consumption or the economic system. But realistically, we're not going to just run to the woods and live off the soil and harvest berries and drink water from the stream. If we participate in purchasing products, going to the store, eating food that's been processed, watching television, having a place to live, I mean, anywhere you go, it's like the air we breathe. White supremacy is everywhere. Until it is stopped, no one can just individually sort of check out. No one can individually say, I'm just not going to participate anymore. No white people can do that. No non-white people can do that. We're all in it until it's gone. I wish it were that easy. I would just walk away from that system, but it isn't that easy, unfortunately. We have to work at it.
Are you tricking me or not?
No, I'm just trying to answer your question as directly as I can. It just isn't possible for any person in a system of white supremacy to individually just stop being part of it. If you're part of a system, the system has to break down for you to be free of it. You can't just sort of, it's not like I can go to a place where there isn't any white supremacy.
Are you telling the truth?
Yes, I am telling you the truth.
You're not telling me the truth.
No, I am, actually. I mean, there's no, and if I'm not, I would love to know how it is that, I would love, look, if you or anyone who's listening.
I don't want white supremacy here.
I don't either, and I agree with you. The problem is, unless there is a recommendation for how a person, and if there is one, I will be more than happy to listen to it, for how a white person can just walk away and stop participating in that system, even if the system is still there. If there's a way for an individual white person to just walk away from it and not participate, I would love to know how that works. I just do not know of any way that is even a little bit possible. It's impossible. And I wish it were possible, but I don't know of how that can be done. If you or any listener has a recommendation for how to do that, I am all ears. I am willing to listen. But I just don't know of any way to do it.
Truth.
Well, that's true. I really don't know of any way, and I haven't heard anyone tell me a way.
Not telling the truth.
Well, if I'm not telling the truth, then someone, it doesn't have to be you, but someone needs to give me an example of how a white person can walk away and no longer participate in a system of white supremacy, even if that system still exists. I haven't heard any example given. Never on this program, never in any writing, speech, program ever by anyone about how an individual white person can do that. If there's an example, I'm willing to hear it. But the only way that it's true and valid to assume that I'm lying is if someone knows that I know a way to do it and I'm just not choosing to do it. I can't think of a way, and so far I haven't heard any way offered by anyone. So it seems a bit unfair. Again, there's that word. I apologize. I've done it again. I did it again, and I apologize. I don't think it's valid to assume that someone is lying if they just don't have an answer to something, if they don't know.
And
I don't know everything. I know some stuff.
And can you please tell white people not to hurt, shoot guns and not to hurt non-white people, please?
Oh, sure. And in fact, not only, I'm more than willing to say that, I say that very kind of thing, not just about guns, but about racism generally, to white folks all the time. In fact, almost everyone in my audiences, probably 8 out of 10 people in my audience.
You're tricking me.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to answer your question. That's exactly what my message is to white people, is that we must stop treating non-white people, discriminating against non-white people, hurting non-white people, participating in the destruction of non-white people. That's my message in every speech I give. That's what I talk about. That's what I write about.
Please tell the truth.
Well, that's what I do in my speeches and in my books. That's the message that I give. Now, if you've read those things and you think that's not my message, or if you've heard my speeches and you think that's not my message, feel free to say that. But that's what when I get up in front of white folks, that's what I say. I'm not sure why you don't think that's what I say. Gus has been in my speeches before, and I'm speaking about white racism and the evil of white racism in those talks and the damage that white racism does in those talks. So that is what I do. What you're asking me to do is what I do. In every speech, in every book, in every article, that is the message. So I'm not sure, what else I can tell you about that, except that what you're asking me is the work that I do and try to do every day.
720, if you have a question for Timothy, 720, your mic is open, 720.
Hotep victim, first
Greetings, sir.
I want to say get well, victim, as soon as possible, because unlike the admitted white racist supremacist Timothy that you currently have on your show, we need what you have to offer in this white supremacist war. I do have a question for the admitted white racist supremacist Timothy. I must admit that I intensely struggled with whether or not I would ask the racist Timothy any questions once I became more aware of how he continues to crack his white word whips into the hearts and minds of our people, all while abusing and subjugating us, while he continues to benefit and make his money, maintain and refine his racist, white supremacist lifestyle. Anyway, after intensely listening to the extreme manner in which you abused the 10-year-old victim child, Justice, by punishing her with your white word whips for saying ouch or for the questions she asked, I thought you were someone that was as committed as a racist can be. And then when you returned to the cows after that show, I was even more confused by the manner in which you conducted yourself. I suspected that you were taking or using the tactic or taking the posture of a white savior, a Jesus who was being persecuted by the vile niggers, Gus and Justice, and you were going to demonstrate your great benevolence and your love and forgiveness and righteousness for the vile niggers by, in essence, portraying yourself as Jesus, saying, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. I love these vile nigger heathens." So my question to you, and all I need from you is a yes or no. Is that a tactic that admitted white racist supremacists such as yourself will resort to when you are exposed in your hypocrisy, so that you can continue to control and win over the hearts and minds of non-white people by cracking your white word whips. And all I need is a yes or no.
I'm not sure what I want to make sure I know what I'm answering. What's the tactic?
Posturing yourself as a white Jesus savior and making us look like vile niggers for asking you questions.
Oh, I don't think that's what I did, so I guess the answer is no.
All right. And one last thing, Renegade, in terms of what you're saying about suspicion, and it seems to me the rhetorical ethic that white people use, and this was something that I had read some time back in Marimba Ani's Yurugu. And she said that in terms of white people, this is what an indigenous, a Native American Indian man had said. They would make slaves of us if they could, but as they cannot, they kill us. There is no faith to be placed in their words. They will say to an Indian, my friend, I think he used the word ally, my brother. They will take him by the hand and at the same moment destroy him. Remember that this day I warned you to beware of such friends, or to use Timothy's words, allies, as these. I know the long knives. They are not to be trusted. So I say to you, victim, and to you, victim, both you, Gus, and you, Justice, job well done. Thank you. I do not trust this long knife.
Cree, I think I got your mic working. If you had your question that you wanted to ask, I think you should be good to go.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Greetings, Justice. Greetings, Gus, and greetings, Timothy.
Sure.
I think that you've described the system of racism, white supremacy, Timothy, to the youngest victim that just called, and to just the listeners generally, as a very powerful social material system in which basically all of the social material benefits go to persons who are classified as white. And Justice asked you earlier how people who are not white are used for the benefit, or she used the word tools, of people who practice white supremacy or white people generally. And I think that you gave as an example in the form of entertainment white people who benefit from the work done by people who are not white. So my question to you is a very similar one too. It really is it is incorporating a lot of the questions that have been asked, including the one by Thomas. Unfortunately, I think I know what the answer will be, but it will be very revealing to hear it. And it's a yes or no answer. If you wanted to approximate, if you wanted to turn down all of the stuff that comes from being white and to walk away from all that privilege, would you be willing to live the standard of living that most people who are not white, particularly black people, live, by sharing the income that you receive from the talks that you give? Would you be willing to tell the agency that gets you speaking gigs that you will not accept any more speaking gigs unless you're able to take a person who is not white and speaks against counter-racism with you to share that podium and to share the profits, even if that means a decline in the living standard of your family such that it approximates that of the average black so-called family? And that's
Sure.
a yes or no.
Well, but there are two parts of it, and I want to, or at least I'm hearing two parts, and I want to respond to them in kind. The part about sharing the podium, I actually have asked that of many of the places where I go, and often, and sometimes have done it, but a lot of times what they have said is, you know what, we just got to have one person, and right now it's either going to be you or that person. Sometimes I've said, fine, then you should bring the non-white person first. Other times they've said, no, we need to start with a white person because these white folks here, these are always very white schools who say this, these white folks here will not listen the first time out to a person of color. So in that case, I make what I think is a strategic decision to go ahead and go. What I tell them is, look, you must follow that up. If you're going to be credible in this work, you must follow that up by bringing in non-white peoples to continue this work after I'm gone. So I have done that before. But as far as the larger question you're asking, If I thought that doing that would make any difference in the system of white supremacy, I would absolutely do it in a heartbeat. Would have done. In fact, the first 5 years I did this work, I was making money, hardly surviving at all for 5 years, and I continued to do it and didn't think twice about it. Would never have thought, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to give up and do something else where I can make more money. For 5 years, the kind of money I was making was below the median in the city where I lived, which was New Orleans, and it was at or below the level of large numbers, maybe not the majority, but certainly at the median level of the black community in that city. So yes, I was doing that for many years and would do that again if I thought now that doing that would in any way materially affect the system of white supremacy. The reason I say it that way is, were I to do that, and I don't believe it's going to have any effect on the system of white supremacy, all that would be is one white person saying, look at me, aren't I noble, I live on less. A lot of white folks do this. A lot of white folks do this and say, oh, I'm not going to consume meat, or I'm not going to wear leather, or I'm not going to drive a car, or I'm not going to do this. And they do it as a way, I think, to make themselves feel morally superior and self-righteous to other people. And I don't feel that that's constructive. I don't think it changes anything. If I thought it would, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I'm firmly convinced that making a decision like that, giving away every dollar, every dime that I had, would do nothing in and of itself to change the system of white supremacy. It would do nothing. It would only have the effect of hitting my children and hitting my family, but that wouldn't change the system. So I'm not sure that, if anything, that would make me look like, everybody that's concerned about me being perceived as white Jesus, that's the kind of thing that someone does when they're trying to be self-sacrificial and say, what a noble person I am. I'm not sure that is helpful, but if I thought it would be, I would do it.
Couldn't every white person who has so much more than almost every black person say the exact same thing, and we would be left with exactly what we're left with? Every individual white person can say, but I can't do it because that won't make a difference, and we'll be in the exact same situation that we're in now.
Well, yes, and if every white person would do it, or if I even thought a large number would, if I even thought that there was a way that my doing it would start a snowball effect, that other people would go, oh, okay, that's what we need to do because, Tim Wise did it, or Tim Wise and 5 other prominent white anti-racists did it, then I would say, hey, let's get on, let's build a movement to do that. I have absolutely no doubt that if I were to do that, and even if I were to announce it and say, hey, this is what we need to be doing, doesn't matter what kind of speaker I am, what kind of writer I am, how persuasive I am. The fact is most folks would just go, okay, that's cool for you, good luck with that, and they would go on about their life. So you're right. Now, absolutely, every one of us could unplug from the system, I guess, in that way a little bit or partially. We could all, but the reality is, unless there is a movement to change the system, unless there is a movement to stop the ongoing discrimination against and oppression of non-white peoples, individual white people giving up their money will not stop that marginalization. We will keep making new victims every day, every minute, every hour. So then the question is, what is more constructive for individuals to take this sort of self-sacrificial, almost like self-immolation, setting oneself on fire, not literally but financially for this greater purpose, or is it more important for us to go to do the work, even if it means, yes, that's how we make our living, and to be heard? And let me also point out, because this is relevant, I've had conversations with non-white folks who are involved in anti-racism work, who do incredible work around the country. They have actually said, look, Tim, if you were to do this work for free, because some have suggested, well, if you believe in it, you could just go do it for nothing, and if you want to make your voice heard, you don't have to get paid at all. And what they have said to me every single time is that if I do that, frankly, it undercuts them, because then what is the school going to do? Are they going to hire the person of color who charges them $4,000 or $5,000? And there are several people out there who do the work, who do very good and valuable work, that are folks of color who charge that or charge more. Are they going to pay that person $5,000, or are they going to bring me in for free? Well, I think we know the answer. They're going to save their money. They're going to want to bring me in for nothing. And then the folks of color out there who are trying to charge, who are trying to also feed their families by doing this work, will get even less work. I mean, it's a bizarre economics of this thing. But the reality is, if if you cut your wage, if you charge less, what ends up happening is you get even more work because all these folks are like, oh, cool, I can get you for $100, fantastic. I can get you for $0, fantastic. I can get you for $500, cool. And I'm not going to pay this person, who's often a non-white person, $2,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 to do what I can get you to do for free. So I think that this issue is just considerably more complicated than the individual economics of one person or even a handful of white anti-racists. I wish it were that simple. In my experience, it's just not.
Okay, I just have one more follow-up question, and that is that if you are successful, if we are successful in making sure that the persons who need the most help receive it and that no one is being mistreated, it seems to me that that is going to be the end result. There will be a redistribution of resources.
Yeah.
So even if you're successful, someone is going to have to, one at a time, is going to have to be convinced to give up some of their stuff. I'm talking about white people, to give up some of their stuff so that it can be evened out. It has to start somewhere. So why shouldn't it start with you? And why shouldn't we? Yeah. And why shouldn't we expect you to base it on the results empirically over, say, a 2 or 3 year period, rather than you forecasting out and saying, oh, I won't even try that because I don't think it will work? How can we take you seriously?
Well, I think anyone who's thinking about it would know that it wouldn't work. I mean, I could live on, let's say, if I went back theoretically to living on what I was making the 5th year out for me doing this work, I think I made it was very little. I mean, it was like well below the poverty level. I could theoretically go back to that. And if I thought that if there is any logic to thinking that that would make one bit of difference in itself, the money that would mean, or that would create a snowball effect. But it seems to me there needs to be some reason to think that's going to work rather than choose that as a strategy. And yes, if there were social change, you're totally right. It would mean that on a large scale. The difference is, as economists talk about these things called economies of scale, the reason you want something like a government policy that forces something like reparations, which I believe in and which I advocate for and which I've talked about and written about many, many times, is because then reparations or some type of systemic redistribution involves so many people. You're talking now 200 million white folks. You're talking hundreds of millions of taxpayers, that it doesn't fall to any one person, that redistribution, that sacrifice is spread as it should be throughout the larger society, and it has the ability to have a real impact. Redistribution from one person or even a handful or even a few dozen, unless there is reason to believe that that's going to catch fire and become some kind of a movement. And if I thought I had that kind of power, hey, fine. But I do not, contrary to popular belief, have that level of influence. Then if it's not going to have that effect, it's better for me and for other white folks to continue to push for the systemic change that is going to bring considerably greater resources than any of us have alone or in a group of 10 or 100 people to actually change that system. And the reality is, if I do all the sacrificing, or a handful of people do all the and there are a lot of people who make a lot more money than me who should also be in on that morally and ethically. We all are morally and ethically obligated to make a change, but we also have to think strategically. We have to think what's going to make a difference. Otherwise, all I'm doing is sacrificing, getting a self-righteous feeling, and affecting my kids. I'm not helping anyone else. It's not going to directly transform anything. We're going to make more victims, and I'm just going to get more of this sort of accolades for being such a self-sacrificial, great stand-up guy, right, which, again, is then going to be even more evidence that I'm really horrible and that I'm really intending to keep the system going because I'm trying to bring all the attention to myself. So it ends up being sort of it's sort of just this circle. We just keep going around and round. If I do what you're saying, I must be doing it to get attention, and it's not going to make a difference anyway. If I don't do what you're saying, then I'm obviously not serious, and I'm just trying to make money. I mean, it is sort of a no-win situation, which is fine. As far as I'm concerned, I don't much care if people believe in what I do or not. It's no sweat off my back. But if we're talking
I will tell you that it wouldn't be a no-win situation for me. I have offspring as well, and I quite frequently have to wonder if I can keep my toilets flushing. So that if I were given 1/3, if you were just to tell the agency, and it doesn't have to be me, there are people who are far worthier than I do, but are in a similar situation, so I'll tell my story.
Right.
So people who are in my situation, if we were given 1/3 of the agency was saying whether or not those people come and speak or not, you're to send 1/3 to this person who does counter-racist work. You know what? I wouldn't be not sitting, because they've taken away the bus stops in my area. We stand on berms that are at a 70-degree angle in the wind, in the rain, waiting for the bus to come by on gum-stained, urine-stained sidewalks to get places, even if it's to get to the hospital if my daughter has to go to an emergency room. No-win situation, more victims. If your children have to eat beans and rice twice a week and mine gets to actually eat on days when we're not supposed to eat, when we don't have to take a trolley and walk in the rain while she's having a seizure, that's a win situation for me. And that's not some drastic situation in Somalia. That's an average situation for a black person, especially a black person who's trying to counter racism. So when you tell me that it's making more victims, I'm sorry. I can't play violins for you. Thank you.
I'm certainly not asking for violins, and I agree that the situation you described is horrific, and it's immoral, and it's unethical. And yeah, for me or any other person, white or not, who has money, sure, we could fork over all of that money. We could do it theoretically for you or for anyone else, and perhaps there's a moral or ethical claim to do that. The truth of the matter is, though, there are billions of folks and hundreds of millions in this country who are in that situation and need systemic transformation. For me, and I do give money to lots of folks, both individuals and organizations that do counter-racism work. Whether or not they are people who you would feel are worthy of that money and do good work or not, I don't know. But I try to do what I can do to seed that work, because I believe in white folks who do this work being accountable, not just with our words and deeds, but also with finances, in helping to bring along other folks, including mostly people of color who do counter-racism work, so that the message gets out there, so that that system gets transformed. The truth of the matter is, though, until that system is transformed, we are going to continue to make more victims. And so the fact that one individual person could give up all their money, that's totally true. And yes, it would make a difference in the individual life to whom we gave that money. But we're talking about a system of white supremacy. Racism isn't an individual problem, and its impacts are systemic, as we all know. So it seems to me, if we're talking about systemic transformation, we have to be doing movement work. And that doesn't take away from the value of individual help. It doesn't take away from the value of one person helping another person, which is something I do try to do in my life every day and every year, and I've done that including with financial support. But I don't think that the proper standard for evaluating the honesty of that is either A, whether I will give you my money, or B, whether I will give Gus a computer, or C, whether I will give resources to any individual person who happens to ask for those resources at a given place and time. That is the standard that probably no one is going to listen to and go, yeah, I think that makes sense. Let me get out my checkbook and do that. Not because there isn't a moral claim on it, potentially. Not that there isn't an ethical argument to be made, that might be a valid thing to do, but because if we're trying to think, and I'm trying to think about changing the society, it is seemingly to me a choice about where am I going to put my time and my energy and, yes, my money. Am I going to put it with helping the millions of people who I know can benefit from it by giving it all away, whether it's all to one person and one family or whether it's a little here and a little there? Or am I going to work day in and day out to try to change the system? And I choose the latter. And maybe that's an immoral or unethical choice in people's minds. I think it's a legitimate one, and I think it's the only one that historically, empirically, has any chance of working. And maybe it doesn't have much chance, but it seems to be the only one that has a chance.
I believe Justice, she wanted to wrap things up. This will be our last questions or what have you. Justice, if you want to wrap things up and finish up with your questions, go right ahead.
How old are your children?
My kids are almost 9 and almost 7.
Are your children white?
Yes.
I mean, how are your children now? Like, not almost, but now.
Well, that means, 8 and 6. I was just saying they're getting closer to being 9 and 7, so 8.5 and 6.5. And yes, they're white.
Okay. Are your children racist, white supremacists?
Well, they're certainly growing up in a system that helps make them into that. So, yeah, I'm sure that's becoming. In fact, I've talked about that. I may have spoken about it, Gus, at the speech you saw, or I may not have. I can't remember if the incident had happened yet, but I think I might have mentioned it on your show, where we were sitting around one day, and, of course, since they were little kids, my wife and I have tried to instill in them anti-racist thinking, anti-racist thoughts, counter-racist thinking, but they still soak up all this stuff. And they soak up racist images, and they soak up racist messages. And so we were sitting around a couple years ago, and it was a weekend, and we were flipping around channels on the television.
All I need is just a yes or no. So
well,
I'm going to go.
Yeah, like I said, I guess the answer is that they're starting to be, even though we're trying to not make them. But I was trying to give you an example.
Do you talk to your children about racism, white supremacy?
Yes, I do. I do, indeed.
Do you let your children know that they function as racist?
Well, we've talked about the way that we are taught to believe racism. Yes, we have talked about that. We have talked about how that turns us into people who often
that's all
think
I need.
that stuff. Yeah, we have. Yeah.
Okay, that's
it. Context of white supremacy. Gus T Renegade, Justice, and Timothy. We're all set April 25th, which is a Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Central. That'll be when Mr. Wise, Timothy, comes back to the context. That'll be number 5. Do you know some of your upcoming speaking engagements that you're going to be doing, I guess, between now and...
Yeah, I can actually point you toward the schedule if you're interested.
Yes, sir.
Have it on... It's not on my website, but if you go to speakoutnow.org, right, and then you search under my name, you will find a schedule. And so, it'll tell you where I'm going to be this week. I'm going to be in Ohio and Illinois at Kent State and Southern Illinois University. Next week, let's see, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Next week I'll be at, I believe, Sacramento State, Sonoma State, and UC Santa Barbara, but I may have that wrong. But that'll be at that Speak Out Now website. And the next week I'll be at Cornell College in Iowa, and a couple of different places one place in New York City, a high school there, Rowan University in New Jersey, and Southern Connecticut State in New Haven. So those are the ones that are coming up. But there's a list that should be at speakoutnow.org that should pretty much have everything that is booked through, I'm looking at it right now, through September, it looks like. Everything through September. Might be some things missing, but I think that's everything.
Okay. I would encourage folks, if you're listening, get out and go observe Mr. Wise in person and, evaluate what he has to say. See if what he says, if you think the regular non-white person who is confused about racism, white supremacy, if hearing him speak would leave them thinking, hey, I should be suspicious of every white person, including Mr. Wise. I highly encourage that. Go out and check out Mr. Wise. And if we could end with, could I request that you promote this program when you go out on your speaking engagements, because you're going to be here. They can come and listen to the archives, decide for themselves about the dialogues we've had, and they can hear you, I guess the 25th should be once in May, once in June, and once in July. So can I make that request?
I will let folks know that those shows are coming. I'll have to let them know that we don't have the May dates yet, obviously, right? But we've got the April one, and I'll just let folks know. But tell me one thing. How do they access the archives? What's the web address for that, or is there a particular one I need to point them to? Because I don't know offhand.
What they can do, if you send them to Blog Talk Radio,
okay,
we can make it super easy. you can just send them to Blog Talk Radio, and they can put your name in. And we've done enough shows that the page should be saturated with C.O.W.S programs. They can just, pick out the ones that they would like to listen to, or you can send them to Blog Talk Radio and just tell them to do a search under racism. The C.O.W.S will pop up several times.
Yeah, I can definitely tell folks to do that, and especially since we know we got some stuff coming up, definitely.
Okay. I would appreciate it. That would help get the show out and get more folks who've heard you speak. They can come and hear you here on the C.O.W.S and see if information is a little different, or if there's a discrepancy between what they heard live in person and what they hear on the program. Thank you for sharing some of your Easter Sunday evening with us. Very much appreciated. I think it was constructive, and we will be looking forward to the April 25th broadcast, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Central, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Tim Wise, the C.O.W.S, number 5. But until then, we will be looking forward to it, sir.
All right. Take care, Gus.
Thank you, sir.
All right. You bet.
Context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, Justice. Not staying to hang out late today. I'm tired. I'm ready to go to bed. Justice, did you want to share any thoughts that you had about Mr. Wise and what he had to say on today's program?
I did want to say that I think he should have gave more clarity on the youngest caller. I think he should have done that.
What did you feel he wasn't clear about?
Like he was saying, like white privilege. I think a few words that end with ism, and I think some other words.
Okay. Perhaps we should point that out in the future. If he's talking to someone that's younger, just I guess prompting him about using clear terms and not being confusing if a non-white person calls in for a question. Do you think that would be something constructive to do?
Yeah. And I was about to go ahead and jump in and say, do you think you can lower the vocabulary level? I was about to say that.
Yeah, I try not to interrupt when other people are asking questions. I try to save my interruptions and such just for my questions. But I think that would be constructive in the future if we think he's any white person, not just Timothy, but any white person, if they are using words that are confusing, we think the non-white person might not be getting clarity, to just go ahead and interrupt and request that they use a lower vocabulary level. I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. So I'll share my email address. justice.asap@yahoo.com. Again, justice.asap@yahoo.com. And
I'm sorry.
And we play White Supremacy with Jeff.
Immediately.
Gus, you there?
I muted myself. Sorry about that. I was able to find some of Mr. Wise's speaking dates that are coming up. Tomorrow, he will be at Kent State University. Let's see. In April 13th, he'll be at San Jose State University. April 14th, he'll be at Sacramento State University. Let's see, April 15th, he'll be at Sonoma State University. April 16th, he'll be at Santa Barbara, University of California at Santa Barbara. April 19th, he'll be at Cornell College. April 22nd, he'll be at Rowan University. April 23rd, he'll be at Southern Connecticut State University. Those are all the speaking engagements he has between now and the 25th that are listed at speakoutnow.org. And I'm giving this out not to promote his work, but because this is what I would be doing. If I was in any of these areas, I would be at his engagement. I would be very close to the front row, and I would try to sit in a position so that I could observe the audience and him as he is giving his lecture, so that I could see the impact it's having, particularly on non-white people who hear him speak. I would be there. I would be taking notes and observing. So, and you really get to see the full effects, because these programs, number one, the other programs that I've heard Tim Wise do, he has not been seriously questioned by someone who suspects he's a racist. So these programs tend to be a little different. But when you go see him in person, you really get to see the potency that he has, particularly over confused non-white people. I mean, it is something to behold. I mean, you really get to see why I harp on that and why I say that non-white people are totally snowballed by Mr. Wise. I mean, it's incredible. It is incredible. You really have to see it in person to see how this plays out. Yes, snowballed. Same effect as playing in the snow. Exact same effect as playing in the snow. You will see non-white people in tears. It is something to see. It's something to witness. So, yeah, if you're in any of these areas, go check him out. And you can check him. If he's saying things that are incorrect, then you can quote him, tell him where you heard him, and you can call the program, and we can bring that up on the show. So, yeah, if you're in any of these areas, if you're close, check him out and see what he has to say, and you can report back and let us know what you heard if you get the chance to see Mr. Wise live and in action. I also wanted to point out, I believe one of the programs we did last weekend, a victim called in and said that he was confused. It was with Jesse Daniels, admitted racist known as Jesse Daniels. And he said he was confused. In the future, if you are listening to the program and you get confused about something, it would be great if you could write down exactly what it is, or make a note of, if it's a mental note, exactly what it is that is causing confusion for you when you call in. That way we could get clarity. I would much rather we go ahead and address it if there's something that confused you, if it was a term, or if it seemed like someone was contradicting themselves, including myself. Go ahead and just write down exactly what it was that was causing you confusion. And that way we can address that specifically. It's a little more difficult to do if you don't have something specific that is causing you confusion. If you just say I was confused, then we really can't address it. So that would be my suggestion or request for in the future. If you are listening to the program, there's some confusion, write on exactly what it is, and that way we can take care of it so that we can minimize the amount of confusion that takes place here at the C.O.W.S. I guess my final word I would have to say for the program, I think people forget or they don't care. It could be a combination of both. Number one, I'm a victim of racism, white supremacy. If I had my switchboard, I would hit my double whammy again. Black male, victim of white supremacy, no phone and no computer doing these programs. Number two, I do not receive any compensation for any of these programs. I don't get a box of Oreo cookies. I don't get taken to the movies once a week. I don't get anything for doing these programs. You have lost your entire mind if you think you are going to send me an email telling me what I should do on the program, what I should not do on the program. You have really bumped your head. Keep telling you, I'm not a nice guy. I am a victim of white supremacy. These shows could be private. I would have no problem doing these shows private and then just making them public after the program has been recorded, and you can just listen to the archives, because I do not care. I'm not here to make fans. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here for one reason: replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. If you're not able to call in, I'm sorry. Life is hard. White people are most to blame for that. If you don't like the guests on the program, I'm sorry. White people are most to blame for that. If you don't think the program is constructive, if you don't think it's doing what you feel it should be doing, I'm sorry, white people are most responsible for that. And don't forget, Blog Talk Radio is free. You could get your own program. If you don't like what's happening here at the Cows, you could get your own show, and I would be glad to help. Show you how to promote, help you out getting guests for the show, anything you need. Hook it up so that you can get posts on Twitter. Whenever you make a new show, it'll pop up, so you'll get a tweet for that. Any help you need in starting a show. But the great spectator stuff, particularly from black people, to just sit back and spectate and make comments, please, I laugh and keep rolling. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. White people permitting, the next time you hear me, I should be at the White Privilege Conference. Oh my, that should be a lot of fun. I hope I'm feeling better so that I'll have energy to romp and have fun at the White Privilege Conference. But it should be, I don't know who all is going to be there. I haven't seen all the workshops and stuff, but I'm excited. I'm scheduled to be there, I believe, Wednesday morning at 10:30 a.m. Central Time. So, yeah, I'm going to try to broadcast sometime either that evening or that afternoon. So you just have to kind of keep checking the site. But there should be a broadcast Wednesday, white people permitting, if I am able to get to Wisconsin, La Crosse, Wisconsin. Don't even know where that is. But, yeah, White Privilege Conference should be there from Wednesday of this week to Sunday of this week. Should be very interesting. I'm excited. Thank you for tuning in to the broadcast. If you didn't enjoy it, life is hard. Again, we should be back on Wednesday from the White Privilege Conference. Just keep checking back to get a specific time and all that good stuff laid out. Other than that, that's going to wrap us for 2 shows each Sunday. Did you want to get anything else, Justice?
No.
Groovy. Thank you, everybody who called in. We had full switchboards all day long. Woo! I hope it was constructive. And, yeah, I hope my travels are safe. I guess if something happens, I know some people expressed concern about Gus going to the White Privilege Conference, said white people could have an ambush set up for you at the conference, which is true. I guess if you don't hear from me anymore, then you'll know. Don't go to the White Privilege Conference. That'll be the lesson. If you don't hear from Gus anymore, something happens, and I disappear with no more shows, then you'll know. Don't go to the White Privilege Conference. They're not your allies at the White Privilege Conference, wherever it goes next year. I think they said New Mexico or someplace. But, yeah, that'll be what to do. Don't go to the White Privilege Conference. We don't even know what happened to Gus. Don't go. But, yeah, if I'm able to report, then we'll get to get some inside information on what they do, how they get down at the White Privilege Conference. Should be fun. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Justice, Gus T Renegade, Context of White Supremacy. We are signing out.